Well, greetings and hello. And my name is Jeff, and this is a special presentation that I'm participating in. It's actually going to be a session coming up on this Wednesday, March the 6th at 9 a.m. Pacific. And I have the Zoom link here if you want to follow that. Basically it's a group called the Urphänomen Research Guild, and we've been going through a series of readings of Rudolf Steiner, really is our primary focus. And the most recent piece we finished was his lecture series called Interdisciplinary Astronomy. And the purpose of this particular talk, I'm actually doing an introduction to what will be the conversation on Wednesday. And the conversation is really going to be in interlinking the concepts of Steiner's lecture series with the book Cosmic Superimposition by Wilhelm Reich. So that's the basic idea here. I just wanted to give you the basic framework and the links as you may need them here. And I'm just going to go into the main presentation now. So let me just go through my screen here. So basically, as I already said, we're going to be kind of correlating or developing a kind of a conversation between these two great pieces. And I'm just going to walk, by and large, I'm going to read through my notes. I'll make some extra comments as I go through. And some key concepts from interdisciplinary astronomy is, and this is obviously a great reduction in these 18 lectures. We could have like a whole several pages just of a bullet point summary. But just for the purposes of the conversation that we're heading into on Wednesday, I just pulled out these 3 points: a holistic method of science and method of thinking. So I should even use the word radical, like a radically different method from what we kind of know in our material version of science, that dominates science and astronomy and medicine and all the fields today are very materialistically based, but Steiner really lays out a whole different thought process. Second point, man as central phenomenon of the cosmos and therefore of scientific method. And we need new methods of thinking, not abstract or model making, leaving rigid Euclidean space for non-Euclidean thinking, which requires expansion of soul faculties. So as I say, that's an extremely brief summary and kind of a bit of a bastardization, but we'll need a bit of a longer summary of cosmic superimposition, because I know this is the part that's new for most of the members of the group. So let me just walk through this. This is my top level summary. I say cosmic superimposition is a synthesis and condensation of all of Reich's life work from his original study of psychoanalysis with Freud all the way up to the most profound observations and insights about the formation of macroscopic phenomena, such as the formation of spiral galaxies. So I just have the basic chapters listed out here, and I'll just give the couple of basic points of each one. Okay, chapter 1, Stage and Meadow. He's digging below the facade of modern life into its most basic functions, as shared in common by both man and cosmos. This offers an implicit history of Reich starting as student of Freud and then transcending the limits of psychoanalysis into character analysis. And that itself could be a whole standalone discussion, that's not where our jumping off point is going to be. Chapter 2, Survey on Man's Roots in Nature. So identifying the common functioning principle between man and cosmos, which is the primordial cosmic orgone energy that Reich identified. And this is really, I'm going to kind of throw in an extra comment here, really the kind of the conclusion or the bottom line of his whole life's work, what really brings it all together, and this is what's happening in this book, Cosmic Superimposition, pulling all the threads together. This cosmic orgone energy, what he initially discovered in studying human beings, from psychoanalysis to character analysis, as I said, and what's the health of the human being and where are the blockages. He discovered this kind of biological orgone energy, this age-old concept, in philosophy and religion, in various systems of thought, of some form of life energy, whether that was called prana or chi or the vital force, in getting more into the closer to our contemporary age. But these ideas permeated human thinking since the beginning of time. But Reich was the first one to really kind of grab hold of that energy in a concrete scientific way, right? It's one thing to have an idea. Ideas are good, but in his mind and his work and his way of working was to really find this concrete scientific, as I said, um, demonstration of what this energy is and how we can manipulate it, how we can access it. So, anyways, that was the beginning. Kind of when he was taking off away from Freud, getting into really grounding some more real ideas about the human being, and this idea of biological orgone energy. As I say, he came to it at the beginning, even when he was getting into his cancer research and his biological research. But by the end of his life, he married that concept with the much broader form of it, which is this cosmic orgone energy. So it's one and the same, right? What's an energy in the human being that animates us and runs all of our life functions is just kind of a subset of this grand principle or this grand energy that really runs everything from planetary systems and the formation of galaxies and stars, and coming down at smaller levels to all the events on the Earth and the meteorological events and the hurricanes and this and that. It's all unified by this one singular principle. It's not different things. So I'm just, as I say, kind of jumping in here with an extra comment, but this is important because it really gives us this historical and functional principle that Reich really was able to elaborate. I mean, this is over decades of work, but this is kind of the conclusion that he was able to come to. So yeah, that's what I was saying. So in this chapter 2, we have the common functioning principle between man and cosmos, the primordial cosmic orgone energy. The other main question really in this chapter, what has kept man blocked and unable to grasp this? So two things Reich would say. One is at the individual level, we have armoring. As I say, that comes from his original work in character analysis and beyond. And at the broader societal level, we have what he called the emotional plague reaction. So that's where this, what we can see as an individual blockage starts to become kind of a group think or a group phenomena where there's an interference or an unwillingness, an inability, kind of a removal of permission at the societal level to even enter into certain discussions, certain topics. So anyway, that again could be its own whole standalone topic, but I'm just kind of keeping this in the outline form here. Chapter 3, the function of superimposition. So where, as I said, he found this primordial cosmic orgone energy, he found the functional principle of how it works, how it operates, how it, and again, he gives us many examples, but just for our purposes, all functions in nature, both microscopic and macroscopic, from creation of particles and primordial life forms, all the way to the creation of spiral galaxies, are expressions of the function of superimposition. So, so I have a little diagram from the book here. So it says inert mass is being created by superimposition of two or more spiraling orgone energy through loss of kinetic energy and sharp bending of the elongated path towards circular motion. So basically, these two movements of orgone energy, cosmic orgone energy, they have this spinning motion, what in German Reich termed as Kreiselwelle, spinning waves of energy. And when these two waves meet each other, that's where we get the original formation of mass or matter, these original particles, right? So anyway, we'll kind of come into more of that as we get into some of the details down below, but this is a kind of a good introductory diagram as to some of this broader scientific research and the observations that Reich was making. And I'll just again make a quick comment or just kind of a link here. We'll get more into this. But if you look at kind of this spiraling Kreiselwelle, the orgone energy movement, we can already start to go back into our Steiner lecture series on the movements of the planets. And he went into great detail, right, from the circles to the ellipses to the lemniscates, all these different forms we went through. And in our imagination, in our conversation here, we can start to overlay some of the possibilities of how we can start thinking of the planetary motions, the way Steiner was leading us to, in terms of this observation of Reich, this very basic kind of spinning wave motion. So I'll just move on for now to chapter 4, called The Living Organome. And that's basically what it looks like. This is kind of a geometrical drawing, but basically all forms of life, all forms in nature, and again, we can get back into our planetary motions and the ellipses and the lemniscates and all these things, is this very primordial egg shape. And we're going to get into a lot more detail of that, but I'm just kind of introducing this. It's a very critical concept. And as I said, as Reich says, it's the formation and functioning of all life forms. And we'll revisit this later in the concept of the dual human being. So that's coming up in a couple of minutes. Chapter 5, Superimposition in Galactic Systems. So the basic building block of the cosmos is not matter, but primordial cosmic orgone energy. And of course, the very famous painting I put in here, The Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, it's as if Van Gogh, in his creative artistic mind, in his genius, in the shape of how he saw things, was directly into this kind of Kreiselwelle or spinning orgone energy. Of course, he lived before Reich, so he wouldn't even have used that vocabulary. He couldn't have read Reich or anything else. But in his paintings, this is portrayed. So clearly, this was a perception of his. So that's quite fascinating. Chapter 6 and 7, we get, this is where Reich starts taking this concept of superimposition and illuminating different examples of it. So the aurora borealis, or the northern lights, are the result of two cosmic orgone streams meeting and becoming visible under certain earthly conditions and vantage points. As we know, they're called the northern lights. They're typically visible in the further northern regions of the Earth, the far north of Canada, and the Scandinavian countries, and Denmark, and all these more northern countries are more prone to be able to see the northern lights. Oh, and let me actually put up the image. Of course, we've all seen images of it, if not having been lucky to see them live in person. Of course, that's very different. This was Reich's scientific investigation, was really coming to understand what created this. And I'm not going to go into all those details. Again, that could be a whole standalone topic, but I'm really illustrating the point here of cosmic orgone energy, this idea of duality, right? We have the dual human beings, which we're going to get into, and likewise, we have this dual cosmic energy streams, right? So from our vantage point on Earth, that creates the aurora borealis. It also creates hurricanes, the phenomena of gravity. And again, I won't go into all of the details of all these things, but just to start to get a bit of the scope of how Reich was tying like all these disparate things. We just think of these as, this is one phenomenon on the Earth, this is another, and we don't know how this works, we don't know how that works, or we have our various theories. But Reich was able to unify it all under this singular function of superimposition. So that's kind of this great power of what he tied together in this final book, Cosmic Superimposition. And the final chapter, chapter 8, the rooting of reason in nature, the expansion of self-knowledge, reaches into the primordial functioning of cosmic orgone energy. The experiential insight that individual functioning, biological orgone energy, is identical with the functioning of cosmic orgone energy. So I sort of said something similar earlier. It's really one and the same energy. It's just kind of in different forms and expressing itself at different levels of reality, but it's not, it's one and the same thing, basically. So to kind of expand on my thought process a little bit and give some more context here. So if we look into medical Heilkunst, what I practice, And the reason for pursuing philosophy, why am I interested in Steiner in the first place? Why am I interested in Reich? I have a pretty solid practical grounding in what I do, in terms of healthcare, in terms of how medical health works. You have homeopathic remedies, nutrition, blah 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 blah. That's a very practical, grounded thing. So what is my interest in philosophy? And basically, oh, and actually, I put Reich here to answer that question for us. This is one of my very favorite quotes of his. It's stuck to me for a long time. He said, I am trying to convince the serious reader that principles of thought do not represent a philosophical luxury, but that, on the contrary, they decide questions of life and death, health and disease for humanity. So I find that extremely powerful, important, meaningful. Like, because again, in the mainstream, philosophy is not very generally well considered or respected or whatever word you want to use, but it's just kind of seen as, you know, maybe of trivial interest, maybe something people do on their time off, over a glass of wine or something like that. But it doesn't really, and of course, in our modern scientific context, even more so, science is seen to have taken over from the history of philosophy. It's like, yeah, that may have been interesting for the ancient Greeks and the whole development of humanity, but it doesn't really have much value now, other than historical. That's the general mainstream view. But yeah, this quote from Reich really, I think, sets things straight as far as what the real role of philosophy is. So from my point of view, that's very powerful. What I was saying about medical Heilkunst is, yeah, we cannot do without clear concepts and clear philosophy. You just can't, you can't get to the bottom of any health problem or health situation without clear concepts, true concepts, and how those are grounded in a very real way. So, anyways, that quote is super important to me. So, as I say here, Hahnemann's medical writings are rife with polaric concepts. So, Hahnemann's implicit philosophy needs to be unfolded and made explicit through Steiner and Reich and other thinkers of the dynamic system. So, Hahnemann, in his implicit wisdom, laid out a therapeutic structure based on three therapeutic jurisdictions. And again, this could be a whole masterclass, like a 500-hour masterclass or something, or a postgrad program on its own. Not going to do that today, but just as a basic outline, the three therapeutic jurisdictions, and there are only three. There will never be a fourth or seventh or whatever your favorite number is. Therapeutic regimen based on the law of opposites to correct an imbalance. Therapeutic medicine based on the law of similars to cure disease. That's the famous homeopathic principle. Therapeutic education, the law of truth to overcome ignorance. So, as I said, I'm going to keep it as simple as that, despite the many details that could call forward, but that's not our purpose today. And as I said it in so many words, the more complex a given health issue is, the greater precision and clarity is needed in the philosophical concepts required for correct diagnosis and treatment. Clear, precise concepts are needed throughout healthcare, but increasingly more so the further up the three jurisdictions a case must go. So the more complex a case is, the more it's going to call on the higher and the highest of these three jurisdictions, versus a very simple case might have its health corrected just from simple regimenal advice. Oh yeah, here, eat a better diet and do these kinds of exercises, and so on and so on. What most of the natural healthcare field is focused on can handle simple cases, but yeah, most of our modern healthcare problems require us to start going up that ladder. So that is all I will say for now. But yeah, that, as I say, certainly a incredibly rich area of exploration for some other day. So scientific methodology. So both Reich and Steiner point to the primary instrument of science, which is the healthy human organism. And we go in Reich from the unarmored character structure as a requisite for the orgone scientist, to the silent observer, which is a name Reich actually started calling himself towards the end of his life, to Steiner's supersensible cognition or body-free thinking for the spiritual scientist. So, in other words, the what unifies all of that is, as I said here, the primary instrument of science is this healthy human organism, and these are some of the specific words that are used to describe that, but just putting that all together. Okay, so the principle of interdisciplinarity, the problem, and this is essentially going back to lecture 1 of Steiner's Interdisciplinary Astronomy. He says, in so many words, the approach to modern science is towards ever increasing specialization, where separate disciplines grow further and further apart, losing any ability to intercommunicate. See Steiner's Interdisciplinary Astronomy, Lecture 1. The specializations become ever more abstract and out of touch with reality. Solution: rethink the methods and structure of science, where each specialization is still rooted in a common, universal method of thinking and the foundational principles which interweave through all areas of life and reality. See Reich's Common Functioning Principle, or CFP, as well as the method of Goethean science. So we're definitely going to be getting into the CFP as we get down into the content here. I do. Actually, this is a little bit, but we're going to get even further later. So Reich's Common Functioning Principle, the principle which unites antithetical unities, the opposite of allopathic science ever dividing into the field into smaller and smaller parts. And here's some more specific excerpts from Reich, from his Ether, God, and Devil, chapter 4. He says, progressing into common elements deepens our perception and understanding of the common functioning principle, ever progressing toward universal cosmic orgone energy as the underlying function of both organic and inorganic, or the living and the non-living. Mechanistic non-interdisciplinarity leads to ever more complex, divisive, rigid understanding only of separate categories, separate fields of research, scientists from different fields who are unable to communicate with one another. So Reich is essentially saying the same idea as Steiner. He's just kind of putting it into his framework and his terminology that he used. So some medical Heilkunst examples of a CFP. So a common function, we could say, is the phenomenon of disease impingement on the human generative power. That's the common underlying function. The functions which kind of what we call antithetical functions, which feed into that of the upper man, or what we call pathic disease, the outward visible expression of disease, the symptom picture, acute suffering, or in the nether man, the tonic disease, the disease archetype or platonic form, regardless of whether it has visible symptoms manifest yet or not. I missed a word there, so I'm just going to type that in. We're going to see a little bit more of this concept of the pathic and the tonic a little bit later, but just to illustrate Reich's CFP as far as a definition right now. So again, this is a kind of a bit of a brief summary, but if we look at Steiner's life as a whole, all the things he studied and wrote about and taught about and everything else, he like Reich, we'll see in a moment, was kind of a really great interdisciplinary scientist themselves, right? They didn't just narrow into one special field, but their core genius, their core insight kind of spread across many, many different areas. And this a little bit of the, sometimes the challenge in reading either one of them is like, oh yeah, now they're over here, now they're over there. Are they crazy? Are they, why can't they just stick to one topic? But this is kind of the etheric mind, or this kind of interdisciplinary mind that we're witnessing when we participate in either of them. So just a very basic summary. You can look at Steiner's life as going from philosophy and epistemology to theosophy to spiritual science, the Christ event, Waldorf education, biodynamic farming, curative eurythmy, anthroposophical medicine, astronomy, cosmology, and other things. So it's like that. As I say, is that one person? Like, why would one person? It's like that old expression, "the jack of all trades, but master of none." Like, usually we put down, the idea of spreading ourselves too thin in that kind of way. And similarly for Reich, he went from studying human sexuality and Freudian psychoanalysis. Then he went from psychoanalysis to his own system of character analysis, from character analysis to bioenergetics. Then we get these broader societal concepts, the emotional plague reaction, and the mass psychology of fascism. That's actually one of his book titles. The discovery of the orgone, which actually gave us two book titles, The Function of the Orgasm and the Cancer Biopathy. And we get one of these master biological, not just biological, but really all up and down the structure of the human being. This 4-beat cycle, the most basic biological function of expansion and contraction. We pulsate, we breathe, we have a heartbeat, we have all these pulsatory functions, expansion, contraction. Reich articulated that out to a more specific 4 beats, 4 sub components of that expansion, contraction. The cancer biopathy is the second part of the discovery of the orgone, gives us the orgone accumulator, bions, which is this primordial form of life energy, door or deadly orgone energy, these forces which kind of kind of reduce human health and human functioning. Of course, you can think of all the toxins in our environment and many other forms, of course. The T particles are a form of door, which are T basically comes from the German word for Tod, which is death. So these deathly particles, or these forms of kind of degenerating life, cells that are degenerating into more cancer cells and things like that. Anyways, just a very brief little splashing some concepts there without really, we're not going to delve into that whole book, of course, but this is just giving the background of some of the stages Reich went through. He went on into studying meteorology and weather manipulation. His book, Children of the Future, how to raise healthy children in an unhealthy society. The Oraner experiment was kind of, you can say, kind of a cross between his meteorology and weather experiments, with this kind of this way of bridging the gap between the human biological cosmic orgone, or biological orgone energy, with the greater cosmic orgone energy. So that was a kind of a great bridging experiment. I'm not going to go into that. It's a fascinating study all on its own, and what he did there. Then coming towards the end of Reich's life, he gets into functioning thinking. I've already mentioned the common functioning principle, or what he called orgonomic functionalism. And the deepest function of thinking in nature is the CFP, the common functioning principle. Now, scientific methodology. So Reich paints a very clear picture. Actually, this comes more from his second to last book, Ether, God, and Devil, that we get, like, back to what I said earlier, that the scientist is the primary instrument of science. The healthy organism of the scientist is going to be able to do clear scientific work and get good results, versus the unhealthy scientist, who gets very skewed results. So this is a great summary of Reich's scientific method, where he would say that you get two completely different worldviews experienced by the unarmored versus the armored scientist. And the he basically he outlines this whole series of concepts which are highly Goethean, where he is sent the bottom line is he's saying that we need to be observing the primary, not the secondary phenomena. And Steiner says something to the same effect. I forget which lecture in Interdisciplinary Astronomy, where he's saying something to the effect that it's almost like we need to start over, rebuild our laboratories with nothing in them, no scientific instruments, and really go back to some really clear thinking, really imaginative thinking, really soul infused thinking, and kind of rebuild our laboratories, our scientific thought, our scientific method, to kind of come more from this kind of primary phenomena rather than the secondary. So Reich and Steiner, they are basically saying the exact same thing. Okay, so getting Yeah, I'm sorry. So this is some of the main points of cosmic superimposition. What is the common functioning principle underlying nature, the functional view of sexology, the aurora borealis, as already mentioned, the northern lights, and hurricanes. Okay, so moving into the next topic area here. Okay, so I mentioned this, but we're going to go into it now. I mentioned this idea of the dual human being, and here's actually a nice artistic image, the famous Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci, and this kind of odd image, this human figure, um, but kind of a duplicate. It's like there's two human beings overlapping each other. Well, what is that? Why did he draw that? Like, what does that mean? It's like, well, this is such a core artistic image to this whole dynamic school of thought, from Reich, Steiner, Hahnemann, Coleridge, all these thinkers around this romantic era, the romantic era of science, of philosophy, of medicine. Hahnemann is in there. We have this core idea of the dual human being. So, as I say, here's our graphic image of it, but now let's get into the conceptual explanation of that. So yeah, in Hahnemann himself, again, he didn't have a highly articulated philosophy about that. I can't give you a page number and a reference to where to go read this in Hahnemann, but you kind of have to read through the lines as to what organizing idea is there, like underneath his work, as it were, underneath his conscious mind. So in Hahnemann, um, he had. He had this. I'm giving two examples here, basically. We see the dual human being in his concept of disease, where he gave us both the tonic and the pathic disease. I just gave you the definition of that a couple of minutes ago. The disease itself is kind of a seed form, as opposed to the outer expression. The symptoms and the sufferings and the dysfunctions, and all the things you report to your doctor are effectively the pathic disease versus the tonic disease, which by and large we're not aware of. It's kind of like, you can say it's, to use an analogy, it's that the moment where conception happens, pregnancy first happens, and um, in that first moment, nothing physically really changes. It's still, you still see the same woman before you, and there's no, other than there's a new cell formation, between the sperm and the egg meeting. Maybe if you can go and see that at the microscopic level, but generally, it's kind of like, other than through some women through a dream, through intuition, intuit that they're pregnant. That can happen a lot of the time, but of course, much of the time, a woman doesn't know she's pregnant. So anyway, this is my analogy here. This is the tonic disease. We don't know we're pregnant with the disease until we do, of course, until the baby starts to grow and develop, and with the symptoms come and all the rest of it. But yeah, this is, as I say, in Hahnemann's concept of disease, we have this hidden idea of the dual human being. One of the two human beings is the one that takes on the tonic disease. The other one does the job of expressing the symptoms. My other example here, Hahnemann's concept of the human living power, he gives us this polarity of the sustaintive power and the generative power. So without going into too much detail about that, that actually is kind of interlinked with this idea of the two types of disease. We get, where disease kind of impregnates at that generative level. We literally become pregnant, impregnated, or engendered is another good word. We engender a disease. It's another generative word. Versus that expression comes out through the sustaintive power. The sustaintive, and when we're healthy, is just that part that keeps us in a state of health. Keeps it, like the word homeostasis. We just innately keep rebalancing ourselves, right? The homeostatic process. So anyway, there's another example from Hahnemann where he implies these two beings at work within our physiology. Okay, so now this, still looking at these two beings, we have what I conceive of as the historical arc of Steiner and Reich crossing in February 1923. Why did I pick that date? That's February 11th is the date when Steiner gave his lecture called The Invisible Man Within Us, the Pathology Underlying Therapy. So this idea of the invisible man, Steiner explicitly gave us this concept of two beings. This invisible man, and we're actually going to read some excerpts from that lecture just to give you paint a really concrete picture of how Steiner talked about that. But yeah, so that when Steiner was giving that lecture, that's where I imagine that crossover point, because February 1923 was just about the time when young Reich he was just beginning his student years and starting to get interested in sexology and and some of the early Freudian psychoanalytic movement and so on and so forth. So he was just kind of taking off. So the visual I have of that is because Steiner gave that lecture in February 1923. That's almost at the end of his life, right? So the visual I have is Steiner's kind of that upper human being, that cosmic being we might call it, and he's kind of spent his whole life on this descending path, coming all the way down to the end of his life, and he meets this lower being, this invisible man, as he called it. So that's the left side of the drawing I would invent for that. Steiner coming all the way down, meeting the invisible man, versus Reich just beginning. Reich began at the bottom. He began in that nether man or that invisible man, and he spent his whole life raising it all the way back up again to his last book, which I already mentioned, which was the cosmic superimposition. So Steiner started way up in the cosmos and brought things down to Earth, and Reich went the other direction. He picked up the football, in 1923, and he raised it all the way back up. So I see the two of them, as I say, a football, or maybe they're on a relay race team together, or whatever analogy you like for that. But yeah, they definitely, like, there's a historical thread where they pass the ball. That's very clear to me as to how all this history unfolded between the two. They didn't know each other. They didn't work together. They didn't edit each other's books or anything of the sort, even have a conversation. But I say that in terms of the gesture in the vast movement of history, this is kind of a very clear little mini stage play, you can say, that happened between the two of them to really spell out this turning point in history. Okay, so let's go a little bit more into the formal part of all this. Yeah, and I also call them, I was referring to the upper being and the nether being, or the cosmic and the earthly being. We can frame it in terms of their work, that Steiner was the great spiritual scientist, and Reich the great natural scientist of the 20th century. That's another version of how these two beings can express themselves, right? Or in medical Heilkunst, we have these personality types, which we call genotypes, and we have the silica type, which was the personality type of Steiner, and we have the sulfur genotype, which was the personality type of Reich. What I call the upper and nether man constitutions. Again, that could be a nice little mini case study on its own, but I'm just pointing to that just as another illustration. So now let's actually go into this famous lecture, The Invisible Man Within Us, from 1923. I'm just going to read the highlighted bits. You can go through the whole lecture. I have the link here, or I have this part of the excerpt of the lecture at the beginning here. Okay, so when we consider the human being, two beings can be clearly distinguished. The physical organization of the human being is spiritually prepared during the pre-earthly life. In a certain sense, it is then sent down as spiritual organization before the human being enters with his ego into earthly existence. This spiritual organization continues to be active essentially during the entire physical life on earth, but it does not express itself during physical earthly life as something outwardly visible. The outwardly visible aspect of this spiritual organization is essentially cast off at birth, consisting of the embryonic membranes that envelop the human embryo during its development. Excuse me, just for 1/2 a second. So sorry about that. Sorry, I slightly lost my place, but let's see if I can pick up here. The spiritual organization continues to be active essentially during the entire physical life on Earth, but it does not express itself during physical earthly life as something outwardly visible. And that's actually, I'm going to throw in a comment there, going back to what I was saying about the tonic disease. That's where we get the kind of that invisible, not visible form of disease. It's like, okay, well, this is in the nether being, and that's what houses the tonic disease, Heil concerns. The outwardly visible aspect of this spiritual organization is essentially cast off at birth, consisting of the embryonic membranes that envelop the human embryo during its development. Everything is cast away as physical organization when the human being attains a free physical existence on leaving the womb. It is somewhat different in character, however, from the body, soul, spirit efficacy of the human being during his physically earthly life. We have an invisible man within us. It is contained in our growth forces as well as in those hidden forces through which nourishment occurs. It is contained in everything in which the human being is not consciously active. The character of this invisible man, which we all carry within us, contained in our forces, growth and nutrition, as well as in our reproductive forces. This invisible man also contains the ego, the astral organization, the etheric organization, and therefore the body formative forces, and the physical organization. This physical organization of the invisible man penetrates only into the nutrition and growth processes, into everything where the lower man, as we have often called it, the metabolic limb man, manifests itself in the human organization. Just give me 1/2 a second here. Okay, sorry about that. Um, yes. Viewed from outside, this physical organization is not separated from the other physical organization of the human being, but is united with it. Okay, so there, as I say, that 1923 lecture, boom. Steiner says, "Here you go. Here's the invisible man." Sorry I didn't tell you about him earlier. Might have made reading all my lectures that much easier, but that's okay. We'll deal with this. Okay, so also if we go to the Philosophy of Freedom, the second edition, and particularly going to the beginning of chapter 9, because what he did in the second edition, if you go through that book, many of the chapters he doesn't rewrite the chapter, but he adds something at the end of the chapter, the author's addendum of 1918. Many of the chapters have that. Not in chapter 9. It's the only chapter in the whole book where he actually wrote a new 1.5 pages and inserted at the beginning of chapter 9. So when you read the second edition of Philosophy of Freedom, chapter 9, you get this whole new 1.5 pages that you've never seen before, and it's like, am I reading the same? Did something change? And it's like, I was confused by that when I first came across that. I was comparing translations and things. Like, what's going on in this edition? I was a bit baffled, but yeah, now I get it, because what he uniquely did by rewriting that beginning of chapter 9, he snuck in this invisible man to the beginning of chapter 9. So once I figured all that out, it really helped me to really unpack a lot of the interpretation of that whole book. Anyways, this is my own process of discovery here. But let me just read from these excerpts. So he says, When we observe our thinking, we live during this observation directly within a self-supporting spiritual web of being. Indeed, we can even say that if we would grasp the essential nature of spirit in the form in which it presents itself most immediately to man, we need only look at the self-sustaining activity of thinking. Only if, by means of unprejudiced observation, one has wrestled through to the recognition of this truth of the intuitive essence of thinking, will one succeed in clearing the way for an insight into the psyche-physical organization of man. One will see that this organization can have no effect on the essential nature of thinking. At first sight, this seems to be contradicted by patently obvious facts. For ordinary experience, human thinking makes its appearance only in connection with and by means of this organization. This form of its appearance comes so much to the fore that its real significance cannot be grasped unless we recognize that in the essence of thinking this organization plays no part whatever. Once we appreciate this, we can no longer fail to notice what a peculiar kind of relationship there is between the human organization and the thinking itself. For this organization contributes nothing to the essential nature of thinking, but recedes whenever the activity of thinking makes its appearance. It suspends its own activity, it yields ground, and on the ground, thus left empty, the thinking appears. The essence which is active in thinking has a twofold function. First, it represses the activity of the human organization. Secondly, it steps into its place. For even the former, the repression of the physical organization is a consequence of the activity of thinking, and more particularly of that part of this activity which prepares the manifestation of thinking. From this, one can see in what sense thinking finds its counterpart in the physical organization. When we see this, we can no longer misjudge the significance of this counterpart of the activity of thinking. When we walk over soft ground, our feet leave impressions in the soil. If the human organization has no part in the essential nature of thinking, what is the significance of this organization within the whole nature of man? Now, what happens in this organization through the thinking has indeed nothing to do with the essence of thinking, but it has a great deal to do with the arising of the ego consciousness out of this thinking. And going on here, he says thinking in its own essential nature certainly contains the real I or ego, but it does not contain the ego consciousness. So basically here he's laying out these two beings in the form of how the upper and the nether ontic organizations present themselves in our physiology. The ego consciousness is built upon the human organization. Out of the latter flows our acts of will. Following the lines of the preceding argument, we can gain insight into the connections between thinking, conscious I, and act of will, only by observing first how an act of will issues from the human organization. Okay, so that, as I say, until I figured out what was going on in this new page and a half of chapter 9, I was like, yeah, that's one of the most powerful Easter eggs that we've ever found in Steiner. That's for sure. Okay, so now to go into the concept of the metabolism of the dual human being, and by implication, we're going to get really two different metabolisms. So from lecture 16 of Interdisciplinary Astronomy, again, I'm going to just read some of the excerpts here. When we move deliberately, we move our center of gravity in a direction parallel to the surface of the Earth. In a sense, we move about a surface parallel to the Earth's surface. On the one hand, we have our movement and mobility parallel to the surface of the Earth, and our fatigue becoming tired. This movement parallel to the surface of the Earth, finding its symptomatic expression in fatigue, involves a metabolic process, an expenditure of metabolism. He cannot do without such movement. Substance is being transformed, yet so that the transformation takes place, as it were, in the absolute, the importance of it is not only for the inside of man's body. Yet we also get tired if we have only lived the lifelong day while doing nothing. Therefore, the same entities which are at work when we move about with a will are also at work in the human being in his daily life simply by virtue of his internal organization. The metabolic transformation must also be taking place when we just get tired without our bringing it about by any deliberate action. We put ourselves into the horizontal posture during sleep, and then I add in the comment here, and when we are activating our reproductive forces, i.e., an activity of the invisible man. And we're going to see a very powerful connection when we get into a Reich excerpt just down below. And so that in this horizontal position, our body may be able to carry out what it also carries out when we are moving deliberately in waking life. Human movement, as we said just now, involves an absolute metabolic process or change of substance, so that what then goes on in our metabolism has, so to speak, real chemical or physical significance, for which the limits of our skin are in some sense non-existent, so that the human being in this process belongs to the whole cosmos. We move of our own will, and a metabolic process, a transformation of substance, is taking place. We let the cosmos move us. A transformation of substance is taking place once more, but the latter process goes on in such a way that the outcome of it, which in the former metabolic process takes its course, so to speak, in the external world, turns inward to make itself felt as such within the human head. It turns back and does not go flowing outward and away. Yet to enable it to turn back, nay, to enable it to be there at all, we have to bring ourselves into the horizontal posture. We have vet these two processes, clearly to be distinguished from one another. One, the outward dispersal of the metabolic process when we move about deliberately in day-waking life, and two, the inward assimilation of the metabolic process by all that happens in our head when we are sleeping. In our deliberate movements, we have a process finding its characteristic expression in curves that run parallel to the surface of the earth. We cannot but make curves of this direction. Okay, so that was from the lecture 16. We're now going to move into some excerpts from chapter 4 of cosmic superimposition. So moving over to the Reich side of the equation now. Okay, so chapter 4, and the name of chapter 4 is the living organome. Oh yeah, I showed you that picture before, that kind of geometrical form of the egg shape. So yeah, this is actually where in Reich we're going to see these, like where Steiner has spelled out for us the two beings. Reich is going to do it in his way now. Okay, so again, I'm just going to read where I've highlighted certain excerpts here. The formation of living matter in orgone experiment XX or 20. And this is, by the way, that's a footnote, or I'm sorry, that's a recapitulation of an expansion of the vast number of lab experiments he did for his book, The Cancer Biopathy. This experiment reproduces the process of primary biogenesis, i.e. the creation of life. Or as he says it, the original formation of plasmatic living matter through condensation of mass-free cosmic orgone energy. The properties of living matter, structure, pulsation, reproduction, growth, and development can be developed by a freezing process in a clear solution of high organotic potency. Forms invariably express frozen movement. We may reason from these forms to use the functions of orgone energy. There exists a basic form of living matter that has no counterpart in classical geometry. So this basic form looks as follows. So this is some of his diagrams here. And you can see, again, back to that living organome shape I showed you before. We're kind of in that same geometry. It applies to, anyways, all these various forms in nature. Embryos, of course, I highlight because Steiner highlights embryos when he's talking about the invisible man, right? How it kind of gets implanted in the embryo. And so kind of joining up Reich's embryos and Steiner's embryos, like, okay, we understand this primordial formation of the invisible man, and how this is kind of this great source of life, how we implant our spiritual reality, our spiritual purpose in kind of, in kind of our earth path that we come to follow. And of course, that starts with the embryo. Trees in general, each single leaf and blossom, pollen, and pistils of plants. And then I add the comment, i.e. the generative principle of Goethe's Urphänomen. All forms in the realm of living matter can easily be reduced to the egg form without violating the individual variations of form must conform to a fundamental law of nature and a natural law of cosmic dimensions. Cosmic orgone energy, an organized living substance, obeyed only one law, its own law of motion. We shall come to the specific basic form of living matter in the organome. Its typical basic form is the following generalization of microscopic forms from experiment 20. So we saw this earlier today. The organome is neither a triangle, nor a square, nor a circle. It is neither an ellipse, nor a parabola, nor a hyperbola. The organome represents a special, novel geometric figure, a closed plane curve, not unlike the ellipse, with half-axes of varying length and width, but differing from the ellipse precisely because of the different length of the large axes. This is my comment, consider the generative formative forces which create the planetary motions of the lemniscate illustrated by Steiner in Interdisciplinary Astronomy. How an organome originates. Two fundamental natural phenomena are involved. The orgastic convulsion, encountered in the entire animal kingdom, the spinning wave, or Kreiselwelle, by observing atmospheric orgone in the darkroom. So this, one of Reich's drawings, this is actually we saw a version of this up above. This is the Kreiselwelle, or that spinning wave of energy, which is this most primordial form of living energy, life energy, cosmic energy. It's, it pervades everything. Like everything that is some functional form of this Kreiselwelle, or spinning wave of energy. So now, if we zoom in on that pattern, if we isolate an individual wave form from the Kreiselwelle, we get this kind of shape like this. If we place two such spinning waves together with their concave sides, we obtain the known form of the ellipse. So that's, as you say, we can start to imply, the ellipse shape there. Now, if we bend a Kreiselwelle in the center at point A and bring the two ends of it together, B and B prime, we obtain the egg or organome form. So there's A, what he calls the open organome, and then when those two come together is what we get, what we call the closed organome. So as we'll see as we work this through, this is precisely the dual being, right? This is the upper being and the nether being, or the visible or physical organization versus the invisible man, as Steiner called it. So so it's right here. Reich says the same thing, that we basically have these two forms within us, these two beings within us. We may now appropriately conclude that through the freezing process, the freely moving orgone energy in the fluid is, in very small part, converted into matter by membrane formation. Logical deduction demonstrates that nothing but a bean shape, our organome, can result from this contradiction between energy flow and restricting membrane. The germinal vesicle tautens more and more, it grows larger. Gradually, the circular form turns into the egg form, our organome form. The specific organome form of living matter and its organs results from an opposition between mass-free orgone energy and frozen orgone that has become membranous matter. Mass-free orgone always strives to break beyond the enclosure of the membrane. The bioenergetic organome is extended and open, the material organome is closed. And my comment is, in other words, this is another expression of the dual human being. So let's see, do I have any more Yeah, I don't highlighting any of this, but he just kind of gives some examples of how two open organomes can come together, two closed organomes can come together, in biological sexual reproduction. But anyways, he kind of elaborates on all of this. We're not going to go into all of those details. As long as the directions of the material and the bioenergetic organome are in harmony, there are no new formations and no directions of movement of the whole. My comment is a component of the definition of health. So, and people, we say this in everyday language. We use an expression like, when we say, I feel aligned with myself, or I don't feel in alignment with myself, like, yeah, we can overlap that onto this bigger physiology and realize our two beings, either they are in alignment with each other, they are properly kind of like functionally lined up, or they're not, and that's where we kind of get one part of our definition of health. So yeah, this is kind of a more elaborate diagram of Reich showing how the energy moves through an organism, the direction of flow, up the spine and over the head, and as we can get a lot, you can kind of start overlaying things like Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and the meridians and the flow of energy and all these things. Well, he's just putting this now into a kind of a modern scientific formulation where we can start to see it in our material consciousness. It starts to build a bridge for us. This contradiction between membrane and energy wave reaches its culmination at the tail end. The tail end is pointed and sharp. The strong forward propulsion of the tail end among animals, based on concentrated orgone wave excitation pressing outward, explains the genital excitation and the orgasm reflex. The orgone, pressing forward and concentrated in the genital organ, cannot escape from the membrane. There is only one possibility of flowing out in the intended direction: fusion with a second organism, in such a way that the direction of excitation of the second organism becomes identical with the direction of the orgone waves in the first. With the superimposition of the two organomes and with the interpenetration of the genitals, the pressed and therefore frustrated tail end can now allow its organotic waves of excitation to flow in the natural direction without having to force them back sharply, and that furthermore, the space in which these waves can run their course is widened. The pre-orgastic body movements, and especially the orgastic convulsion, represent extreme attempts of the mass-free orgone of both organisms to fuse with each other, to reach into each other. While the energy of one organism flows into the energy system of the second organism, mass-free orgone energy actually succeeds in transcending the limits of the material organelle, i.e. the organism, and by merging with an organotic system outside its own, it continues to flow. Orgastic longing, which plays such an enormous role in animal life, now appears to express this striving beyond one's own self, this yearning to escape from the narrow confines of one's own organism. Seen functionally, all subsequent functions of living matter originate in the primal contradiction between the material and the bioenergetic organelle. In other words, the two beings, right? The two beings of man. So that's about our the main content. And as I said, I just wanted to give a big overview, just kind of, this is a big conversation starter. There's so many more details. But yeah, just to start, get the topics flowing, the conversation flowing. This is kind of what I wanted to lay out. You can look up any of these books or lectures. I put in all the links here. And otherwise, if you go back up, to the top, you can get those links for Wednesday, the Zoom link, and I'll make sure anything that you need for pursuing any of this, you'll have available to you. And otherwise, yeah, I look forward to continuing our conversation.